Hey everyone, I want to do one example with you. I really like the way the Marginal Revolution University stuff goes through this, but I like to do this one example that pulls together a lot of the separate things that they've talked about. So I want to think about the market for plywood, and maybe specifically the market for plywood in a coastal town in South Carolina. Right? And so I've already pre-sketched in here a supply and demand curve. There's the equilibrium. There's an equilibrium price. We could think about the area of consumer surplus up here, the area of producer surplus down here. All right, and everything's fine to start with. But then there's something that happens in this marketplace, and that is a terrible hurricane hits this coastal town. Now, what happens to the demand for plywood after a terrible, horrific hurricane strikes? Well, windows are broken out, roofs are damaged, right? There's all sorts of damage. So all of a sudden the demand for plywood increases. So, right, increase in demand, that's a rightward shift. Is this going to be a little one? No, this could be a really, really significant shift in the demand for plywood. Right, so this is an increase in demand. Now, if the market is functioning, if we let the price signal do its work, then the price of plywood goes up. Right? And the quantity of plywood sold goes up as well. Right, there's your new equilibrium. And at the new price, there is a new area of consumer surplus, right? And it looks like this. Right, and it's everything below the demand curve all the way down to the equilibrium price. And the area of producer surplus is everything above the supply curve, right, and up to the equilibrium price. So there's the area of producer surplus. Let me see if I can make that a little bit neater. However, do people like it if they have endured some terrible natural disaster like a hurricane? It's damaged property, maybe lives have been lost. There is lots and lots of devastation, right, in the wake of this hurricane. And all of a sudden they see the price of plywood nearly double, right? Maybe it's not quite double in my graph, but let's say it goes up a lot. What? So this doesn't seem right or fair or right. So this is what we call price gouging. And a lot of states, as you saw in the other videos, have laws against price gouging. And so let's say that there's an anti-price gouging law, and it says that when the governor declares a state of emergency, it is illegal to sell goods for more than a certain increment higher than the existing previous price. We're going to keep it super simple. We're going to impose a price ceiling that's equal to the original price, right? So equal to the initial equilibrium price, that's PE. So we're going to draw in right here. This is our binding price ceiling. Okay. And this is imposed by the government. It's a legal maximum price. It is now illegal to sell plywood for more than the initial PE, right? Than the starting level. Now, notice what happens though. When let's just for a minute think about the initial post-hurricane. In fact, let's label this, right? This is demand 2 is after. Let's make it bigger so I can write neater. After the hurricane, right? That's demand 2. But at that point, if we allowed the price to shift to E2, then you would see that all of these people who value the plywood, who value the plywood at more than E to the P2, right, the equilibrium price, they get the plywood. And all of these people on the demand curve, right, all these people below E2, they do not get the plywood. They would like to have some plywood, but the value that they put on the plywood is less than E2, and so they choose not to buy it. And so price is the allocation mechanism. right? So one way of allocating scarce goods in a world of unlimited, or competing wants is to use the price mechanism. That is the way that in our market system, that's the way most goods are allocated, right? It's based on the price mechanism. So that's how it would work in under E2. But what happens whenever we go to the world with a binding price ceiling and we impose this maximum, legal maximum price? Well then, how many people want to buy plywood? So the quantity demanded with the price ceiling, right, is way over here, because at PE, after the hurricane, people on the demand curve all the way down here want to buy plywood. How many sheets of plywood are available? Well, is there Q2? Is there this amount here that corresponds to E2? No. At this lower price, you look at the supply curve, and at the lower piece of E, only so you look at the supply curve. That's this one right here, and let's say the supply curve tells you the quantity supplied over a whole range of prices. You look at the particular price you were interested in. That's PE. That takes you to the initial equilibrium. Okay. So the quantity supplied with the price ceiling is right here. And so does the market clear? That is the quantity supplied equal to the quantity demanded? No, right? They're not equal. And what do we call this distance between them? Well, that is a shortage, right? So just like you saw before, a binding price ceiling, and I say binding because the price ceiling is set lower than the E2, right? Lower than the price it would go to, the equilibrium it would move to without the intervention. So a binding price ceiling creates a shortage. So let's also extend this line up, because how many sheets of plywood are available? Only QS, like the initial QE or QS at the PC, right, at the price ceiling. So that much plywood is available. Now, what does that mean in terms of the surplus? Well, if these people on the demand curve up here get the plywood, and they only have to pay this price right here, then they're made better off, right? So consumer surplus could conceivably come all the way down from the demand curve, which you can't see all of it because of how I drew it, right? It would go up through here, all the way down to PE. So this rectangle right here, that would be producer surplus if there were no price ceiling, right? If you allowed the market to fluctuate, the price to fluctuate up to E2, that would be producer surplus. This can get transferred to the consumers. And that's sort of the goal of the price ceiling, right? Is to not screw over or gouge the consumers, but to protect them and keep the prices low. But what are the trade-offs? What are the costs of that? Well, for one thing, this area right here represents potential consumer surplus, and this area right here represents potential producer surplus if we went to E2, right, and the market cleared at a larger quantity and a higher price. But at this price ceiling, right, at the legally binding maximum price, those extra sheets of plywood never make it there. And so this whole area of potential surplus is lost. And what do we call that? A deadweight loss. Right? So there is a pretty big, ugly deadweight loss. There are potential gains to society that never materialize because this plywood, the plywood between QE and Q2, right, this distance right here, that plywood is never brought to market in coastal South Carolina, right, where it's needed. So why is that? How is it that there is Q2 sheets of plywood at the high price at P2, but at the lower price at P sub B, there's only this level of plywood over here, this smaller level of plywood? Well, there's a couple things. One, in one of the Marginal Revolution videos, they show how high prices lure entrepreneurs to bring in more goods, right? So there's those trucks, people find ways to haul stuff from a lower valued use to a higher valued use. They get it to the people who really, really want it. That's the example in the article by Mike Munger about the people, the entrepreneurial folks who rented trucks. They found refrigerator or freezer trucks. They filled them with ice where ice was plentiful and cheap, They drove for hours. As I recall, in the article, they even took chainsaws and tools with them. In some places, they actually removed trees from the road in order to get through. And they delivered ice to where it was really, really highly valued. And then they sold it at really high prices, and it made people mad, and they got arrested, and their ice got impounded and melted. So that's the story that you should look at in a Mike Munger thing. So the question is, I understand the outrage, right? You're like, these people have just endured this hardship, this terrible scenario, and now you're sticking them with these high prices. It's just not right? It's just not fair. The question is, are you better off to just not have ice or plywood or generators or bottled water available, right? Whatever the emergency thing is that you're looking for. In our case, maybe it's toilet paper or surgical masks, right, or other personal protective equipment. You rather have high prices or a shortage? That's, in a super simplified way, part of the trade-off. So here we have the shortage. We have the deadweight loss. We have a couple other things to think about. This area of consumer surplus that I showed in orange, right, that went all the way from the demand curve, which I'm now highlighting in yellow here, and imagine it goes farther up off the screen, in a place you can't see. And I said it goes all the way down to here, and we said that's all consumer surplus. That is if these exact people on the demand curve, I'm writing with, oops, I touched something, why is that happening? Okay, I don't really understand why I can't. I want that to go away. Let's move this a little bit and see if that changes anything. What have I done? Why will it not? Let's say done. How about that? This is getting frustrating. We may have to stop and pick up again. All right, I'm going to stop here. We're going to fix this, and we're going to pick up with another video so that the keyboard doesn't keep